Hello everyone, my name is Kavya Sharma. Welcome to Pragati Vichar Literature Festival. Today I have two very special guests with us, but today, first of all, I will introduce you the topic and the theme of the session. So the topic is Voice of Resilience, Exploring the Unseen Realities, and the theme for today's session is Society. So today we have Shivaji and Yolanda with us. So how are you feeling today?
Great. It's a rainy day, which tends to be slightly warmer, but it's good so far.
And what about you, Shivaji? How are you feeling today?
Oh, I'm feeling good as well. Thanks for having us here.
You're most welcome. So now I'd like to introduce both of our lovely panelists to the audience. So I'll start with Shivaji. Shivaji Das is an author of critically acclaimed travel, art, and business books. He was the first prize winner for the Times Magazine Subcontinent Drift Essay Contest and shortlisted for Fair Australia. Prize for short stories, Shivaji has been actively involved in migrant issues and is the conceptualizer and organizer for the acclaimed migrant workers and refugee poetry contest in Singapore, Malaysia, and Kenya, and is the founder and director of Global Migrant Festival. So another day and a really amazing guest we have today is Shivaji. And once I read your bio, it just makes me feel there's so much for you to offer, and there's so much things that you've worked on. It just gives me so much pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. So last but not the least, we have a really amazing panelist. Her name is Yolanda. You is a multi-time winner of the Golden Point Award. Her book Neighbor's Luck is a collective collection of short stories shortlisted for Singapore Literature Award 2020. Yolanda's work has been featured on Journal Times, New York Times Travel, Dimpo Magazine, and many more. So it's such a pleasure to have you here, and you have worked in such diverse areas, and you have also been awarded so many times. It gives me so much pleasure to have to be interviewing you today, and you have done such amazing work. So it just makes me feel so happy.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
So now we'll be asking our panelists a few questions and taking their views on this, and let our audience know what your viewpoint are about, and let's just get enlightened. So my first question is, the book portrays a spectrum of migrant experience from diverse backgrounds. How did you ensure these stories were authentically represented while respecting the nuances of each character's journey? So, Yolanda, would you like to answer this question?
Sure. Hmm, to start with, I think there were definitely a lot of conscious effort to understand the context where these people, a lot of times is where, they grew up. We start by understanding the kind of family climate, the kind of characteristic they are, so that we understand not just the story, but the backdrop of the story, and to understand the whys of the decisions that they took, mainly to migrate or not to migrate, and what are some of the options they actually had on hand. So that is one, about understanding the context and the backdrop. And the other thing we did were also about kind of when they went through that entire journey, what were the feelings and how did they feel? And sometimes it's the feelings that took over sort of the rational decisions or calculations, right? So, for example, say one domestic worker who was very much torn between her employer's daughter and her own biological daughter. And that's not really a, sort of a logical decision. It's more of that my heart belongs to both places. And so, other than the feelings, there is also a part where we work with them on their reflections on their past. So it's not only about what happened, how things happened, but also how they make sense of the past and how they envision or aspire for the future. And that makes a more complete picture of every human, not only our interviewees, but each individual, how we look at our life. So through that is how I see we try to bring in the authenticity. On the other hand, there are also a lot of effort going into, what kind of language do we use? Do we preserve the originality of the words, or do we preserve the originality of the ideas over the words? And well, the words could have been misleading. And lastly, what I have in mind is about that we double checked always with our interviewees so that as we kind of finalize and wrap up those writings, to let them confirm that they were not misunderstood and that indeed that final version is still pretty much what they meant and what they wanted to express.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I'll stop there, and Shivaji, please chip in if you have any other thoughts in addition to that.
Yeah, like Yolanda said, I think understanding the context was very important for us, especially in this case. I must say it was not easy. We come from a different socioeconomic background from many of the low-wage migrant workers that we have profiled. And they also come from very different cultures in many instances from us. Some are from the Philippines, from Indonesia. They are not our own culture. So there are these challenges as well. What probably helped us a little bit is to first get the information as authentically as possible, which means that we, having worked with migrant workers for many years, we were able to kind of have a sense of the overall socioeconomic background under which their lives are. And then the second thing also is that we were familiar with many of the people we have profiled and interviewed. So they had, I would say, kind of a safe environment to talk to. They felt confident in us and comfortable in sharing some of their deepest thoughts and fears and also biases in some cases that they had. So, this familiarity with the context as well as the people we interviewed, not all of them, but many of them, that helped us to get the information and insights and perspectives in the first place. And then when it came to representing them in the book, there are also challenges, like we may have lost nuances of certain proverbs they use, some linguistic issues, or also some consequences of things we may have missed that. But what we did, as Yolanda mentioned, was to check with them and make sure that whatever we are presenting is what they want to say.
Right. So I think the fact that you checked what you write was exactly what they wanted to say made it so authentic and exactly the language that the people were talking. So my next question is, when I talk to you both, the one question that pops up into my mind is, how did you meet and how did you decide to collaborate on writing a book together? Yolanda, would you like to answer?
I can answer the first question.
Okay, Shivaji, how about you?
So when we met, I think it was in front of a library. And at that time, Shivaji positioned himself as a wannabe writer while we were meeting for the first time. So we indeed have gone quite a long way that from that moment. Yeah. So over to you for the second half.
I'm not sure if the audience knows, we are actually a couple. We have been married for more than almost 12 years now. So, yeah, we were together, but our writing journeys were very different. Yolanda used to write more of short stories, poetry, whereas I have always been writing nonfiction, mostly around travel. Now, this book was written during COVID. Obviously, I couldn't do any travel writing at that point of time. But both of us were also involved with migrant issues. I have been doing poetry competition, organizing poetry competitions for low-wage migrant workers, organizing Global Migrant Festival for a few years. So this was a topic, migration, labor, very close to both my and Yolanda's heart. And then in terms of approaching this book, we also had many complementary things to offer to each other. One is, of course, the language. I could speak Bengali, Hindi, English, many of the languages the migrant workers speak. And on the other hand, Yolanda speaks Chinese, which many of the migrant workers come from China, and that's an important aspect as well. There is the gender perspective. Many women are more comfortable maybe sharing their perspectives with Yolanda, while more men would perhaps be comfortable with me. So all this, complementary skills made this collaboration make sense for us.
Right. And this Because both of you come from such diverse culture, and meeting people from such diverse culture somewhere helped you us both of you to understand people with your something similar to both of your cultures. So, your book is coming up, and we would like to know a little more about your book. So, Yolanda, would you like to say something about it?
Yeah, so this is our new book that was just launched in January, and I think will be available in India in March. And this book is about Indian and Chinese romantic relationships. So, as you probably see us, right? I am originally from China and Shivaji originally from India. So we have interviewed 18 couples, right? And some of the singles as well who were and or are still in a marriage or sort of a love relationship with each other.
So, now I would like to know about your book that is going around, and people are reading it, people are loving it. So, what is your take about it? So, Yolanda, can you show the book if you have it with you? Oh, that's how the book looks. So, Ajay, would you like to talk a little about the book, please?
Sure. So our book, which is already there in India and a few other countries, is called The Visible Invisibles. It's a collection of life stories of 40 low-wage migrant workers. Some of them are international migrant workers who are, let's say, from Indians working in Singapore or Malaysia, or they are domestic migrant workers as well, like a Chinese migrant worker working in China. And what we try to do in these books is not just to highlight their challenges, the tough working conditions they face, the wage related concerns they have, and also many accidents that they have to go through, including death in some cases, but also their background, what makes them migrate, what are their hopes, their aspirations, their fears, what do they think of their family, their love life, and all of that.
That's such a nice book. So, I think this paired worked pretty well with the writing book process, and the book turned out to be so beautiful. So, shall we move on to the next question? In your opinion, how does literature serve as a vehicle to shed light on the lesser known aspects of global migration and create a sense of empathy amongst the reader? So, who would like to go first?
Yeah, I can go first in this. I mean, like just like any issue or any whether it's a social issue, political issue, arts in general and literature in particular has had a very important role to play in creating mass awareness or also sharpening the perspectives to make things better and make a very strong case for improvement. We have seen this in the case of slavery, for instance. Books like Uncle Tom's Cabin had a big impact on how common people looked at slavery, which was something very distant. And similarly, in the case of migration as well, books like by the well-known refugee writer Behrouz Boochani has created quite a stir among people, general people, about how conditions are for many refugees and other migrants. So this is the guidance that we had. And I believe what literature does and arts does in general is to create a curiosity about people or groups of people who are not the same as you. And that curiosity is somewhat satisfied when you write about people or groups of people. And at the same time, it creates or can create a sense of universality, which also makes people empathize with the characters that we talk about. And we were trying the same thing with this work on migrant workers, low wage migrant workers, to create that interest in their lives who are very different, at the same time have that universal perspective that combines or we all of us share.
Yolanda, would you like to add up something?
I think Shivaji has pretty much said everything I wanted to say as well on this topic. Yeah.
Okay. I have one more question. So, when you go to a person and you ask questions about their lives and and their nuances and experiences they had, do you feel sometimes such emotional stories and heart-touching stories also affect you as a person sometimes?
Sorry, could you repeat the last question here? the last
When
sentence.
you go meet people and take their interviews to gather their experiences, sometimes their stories are so emotional and heart touching. So does that affect you as a person sometimes?
Yeah, I think absolutely. At least for me, I can vouch for that. It's really, also allowing myself to kind of vibrate with that frequency, to feel, to sense that energy that they were bringing out. Especially some of the stories, it's like I could hear the voice. And I think as a writer, of course, we keep a warm heart. We need to have a cool head still to be able to not completely just, get absorbed in that energy, but to understand why and how and what around those topics as well.
I think that's
And
the sorry.
that was one of the reasons we wrote the book this way as well. I mean, there are tons of books which dwell on statistics, causality, and all about migration, low wage migration, labor, and all that. But we wanted to bring out that emotional perspective where individuals stand out, their own stories, their lives, their hobbies, their fears, their sacrifices, and also their biases and perspectives, which are not the greatest all the time. They stand out because we were emotionally reacting to their lives, having worked with them for so many years. So instead of just statistics, cold statistics about migration and all that analysis around that, we wanted to bring out these emotional aspects of their lives, and we hope the book can do justice to that.
It is. It is truly doing justice to that. The narratives in the book reflects immense resilience despite adversities. How important was it for you to highlight the strength and courage of these individuals?
So how it came to me is that I think when we think about all the migratory birds, they fly thousands of miles. That's really a lot of resilience to overcome barriers or, you know, even artificial challenges. And that's pretty much the same for humans because it's always because usually in our host countries, there's something that we aspire, and there is also something that in our hometown that we want to run away from in some to some extent. But I see that resilience and overcoming challenges are sort of a very natural part of that whole migration process. But what I find more interesting is actually the less linear aspect, that it's not just about there is a challenge and then I just endure it and overcome it by working so hard. I think what we find much more nuances aspect is about when they are questioning, should I just be a martyr? Should I actually be just sacrificing my entire life for all these people back home who are sucking my blood like parasites when they could have done some justice to me as well? So that there are such questions, and then there are also other questions about how much should I actually value my own time with my kids versus money or financial aspects. And then there are a lot of other questions as they come into contact with this new culture and as they integrate, as they want to change whatever is happening back home and all that. So I find that nonlinear, those nuances, that life is not black and white, that all the intricacies, they are a lot more um, touching actually than that resilience to overcome a soul challenge in their, as a main quest.
Would you like to add
Yeah,
on something?
yeah, I would say that overall, even though there is this resilience, as Yolanda mentioned, which is inherent characteristic of migrants, but also this comes in because many of the low-wage migrant workers, they come from poor families, and as a child, they are used to being denied access to many things. They see richer kids get on the streets or in bigger houses. So there's this inherent resilience that comes in because of the natural background of many of the people we have profiled. But it's not easy despite that. I mean, many have self doubts, many go back home, especially, let's say, even though we may consider them coming from relatively poorer backgrounds, they would be considered lower middle class families back home. And usually, let's say the man or the boy from such a background would have never picked a glass in his life back home. Everything would be done by their parents or others. But when they come to a place like Singapore or the Middle East, they pick up the drilling machine the first day. That very shock, the shock of working in extreme heat and sunshine, that all causes many people to really question their decision. And some give up, but some just stay around thinking about their families and a bit of self-respect as well. Like, what will people say if I go back? Yeah, so it's not easy. There, it's not as linear as Yolanda said.
And if I may just add one more point that popped up to my mind, one is that it also I hope it can make people question, why does it have to be so hard? Why do people, or they're just going to another country to work? Why do they have to put up with so much of hardship to not be able to contact their loved ones for days? And which happened in some cases, and why they have to endure the kind of challenges like no personal space, no privacy, or living or working in really terrible conditions. These are not the kind of hardship we should endure. So, and I think as a society we should reflect on that. And there are also two other things. One is about the education and job opportunities that a lot of these, as Shivaji mentioned, these low-wage workers from their childhood to their, youth, they were not granted access to. And so that they are like, okay, the moment I grow up, I was told I must become a migrant worker because that's the only way out. And that again gives us a question that how then as collectively globally something must have gone wrong for some people to see that as the only choice as they grow up. And what is also striking is about how women are often more denied opportunity for education. Many of the girls or the ladies mentioned that they were very good students in school, and yet for whatever reasons they were made to stop studying and go for get ready to marry and then end up in terrible marriages and then become a migrant worker as sort of a way out to earn their independence and respect. So a lot of these questions, we are hoping that we can get readers to reflect and think, and hopefully there's some ways for policymakers to reconsider some of these consequences.
Yeah, I would highly agree with your point that they have to go through a hardship, and there is a certain ray of light that can help them lessen their hardships by the policymaker and the society. It would have a great impact. So I would highly agree on that. And just these small little changes can actually impact bigger lives in the upcoming years. So my next question is for you, Shivaji. Your past literature work encompass diverse subjects like travel, art, and business. How did your prior experiences in these areas shape your approach to addressing such touching and human-centric narratives in this book?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've written on diverse topics, but they have certain commonality as well. They are all nonfiction works to begin with. But even in my travel or art related work, I've always focused on the human aspect of both traveling as well as art, the workmen behind, the general people on the street that I would meet when traveling. And they are not always from the highest socioeconomic background. And that's been my focus in all the kind of work that I have done. And as a nonfiction writer, there are just three things I try to get better on. And first is trying to get the right people to, for instance, interview or understand, so that finding the right people is common to all these kind of literature that I may have engaged in. Perhaps also setting the right framework and asking the kind of questions that I would like to really understand. And that's also quite common among all the kind of nonfiction I've done. And the third aspect is how to organize them so as to make a coherent as well as a readable narrative, which is pretty much common across all the kind of work that I've done. So, there are these common approaches to the methodology of going about it. And yeah, that helped me in writing this book as well.
So shall I move on to the next question, Yolanda? Would you like? Uh, with your extensive literature achievements, how did you How did your previous works and experience contribute to shaping the storytelling in this collaborative project?
Right. So, as a fiction writer, I think I was always trained to very intuitively go into the character. So it's not just about telling the story, but really being able to build the character so the person comes alive in front of the audience. And just coincidentally, my professional world and work, I'm an executive coach. So I listen to people's personal story day in, day out. So there is always a focus for me to understand the person first and the story that comes along with that. It's a conscious kind of effort to get under the skin, build the character, and then see the world through that lens instead of being an outsider observer to look at the person from a different angle as much as my limitation allows. So I think that really helps because that really work with the unique aspect of each individual as much as they share some common economic or sort of backgrounds. They do have their very, very unique upbringing and very unique personality as every person is. And what I also find sometimes as a fiction writer does not help is that I was really so badly in love with all the originality. And sometimes it's just like, okay, what if that sentence is repeated 50 times? There's a beautiful literature device. And what if I don't tell the story in a linear or, a chronological way? But I came to learn in this process that it's not exactly the same because in nonfiction there are a lot more life details, and if we invent too many structures, it can be overwhelming for the readers to follow. So I think it's also a great learning process for me where Shivaji brought in those rationality and his experience in nonfiction writing. Well, I think what I brought was to add in some of the colors and really spot some of those story-worthy moments and impactful moments. As you know, this is the story, this is the essence, and this is what we can bring our, emotion resonance in. Yeah, so that's my short, long answer.
I would like to thank both of you for joining us today for this session, and you made it such an enlightful session. I've learned so much, and this conversation was so touching, and it was just beautiful. And learning about your experiences and your collaboration towards writing the book, it was really fun. And would you like to say a closing message? I would like to go on to Yolanda. Would you like to say a closing message for our
So,
audience?
yeah, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to be here to have this conversation. I'm also learning a lot from the questions that you are asking and sort of reconsidering some of the aspects. So enjoy it and thank you once again.
Rajesh, would you like to say something? Do you have a closing message?
Thanks for having us. So I would highly encourage our readers to learn more about migrant workers, especially low-wage migrant workers. There are millions of them in India as well, and there are many organizations which are doing fabulous work about advocating their rights. So I do encourage people to look at the backgrounds, the challenges that many of the low-wage migrant workers face. They may be working in your home as a domestic worker, or you may see them under the flyover. Have a thought about them and what they can get better from society. That's all. Thank you.
Just a great message. Thank you so much. And thank you, all lovely audience, for being a part. Now we are all signing off and hope to see you in the next session. So my name is Kavya Sharma and I'm signing off. Thank you so much, our lovely guest, for joining us today.